Great. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the launch of the IPA Mannkal publication, Project WA, a growth and productivity agenda for the next government. My name is Andrew Pickford. I'm a Senior Fellow at Mannkal Economic Education Foundation, and I'll be your MC for the morning. For those not familiar with the organisation, Mannkal works to promote the free market system in Western Australia. We do this by running events, promoting student scholarships, and producing publications such as Project WA, which you've all got in your hand. We're fortunate to work with IPA on this publication, and we're glad that Chris Berg has made it over from the East for the launch of this important document. So the format this morning will be Chris Berg, the Research Fellow from IPA, discussing the general approach of IPA and the importance of reform, as well as the IPA's involvement in Project WA. This will be followed by the two authors of the publication, John Hyde, Director of Mannkal, and myself. Finally, we'll call on the Chairman of Mannkal, Ron Manners, to formally launch the document, and afterwards we'll have question and answer for any of the media present. And for those also for the media, all the authors and presenters will be here after the formal conclusion to take specific questions. I now welcome Chris from the IPA to provide a background to Project WA and talk about the importance of reform and also the intellectual capital which IPA has provided or contributed to this important study. Please welcome Chris.
Thank you to the many supporters of Mannkal and the Institute of Public Affairs here today, without whom, of course, we really couldn't do any of this important work and other work we do. My name is Chris Berg. I'm a research fellow with the Institute of Public Affairs and author of my most recent book is In Defence of Freedom of Speech, From Ancient Greece to Andrew Bolt. We've worked very closely at the IPA with Mannkal and Ron Manners particularly for many years, developing a suite of policies that can make Western Australia the open and wealthy economy which its unique opportunity promises. We're now 3 decades on from the start of Australia's great period of reform. It has been an unambiguous success. The shift from an insular protected nation to an open modern nation was dramatic. However, we must recognise that this was not a shift we made alone. The mythology of the Hawke-Keating years is somewhat obscured for many Australians that the crisis of the 1970s was a global crisis, and that the reintroduction of market principles into public policy was a global solution. All major Western liberal nations did similar things at similar times. So given the global nature of the reform movement, we have learnt many, many lessons that I don't think have been fully recognised in Australia. And we should also recognise that those reforms have raised new problems and have created new challenges for state and federal governments. For a state like Western Australia, those challenges are particularly acute. The erosion of Australia's system of federalism has crippled the states. Where the Commonwealth has not outright taken over areas of policy, it is determined to control them. In one of Kevin Rudd's less lucid moments, he even proposed a federal takeover of urban planning, as far from a Commonwealth issue as you could possibly get. Any future reform movement for Western Australia or for any state will have to claw back policy control to a state level. But I suspect in Perth, I am speaking to the converted on this. That would not be the case if I was in Melbourne or Sydney, where federalism is viewed pretty much as an inconvenient roadblock to the great plans of great men. I spoke recently at a policy seminar in the Victorian Department of Treasury on the importance of federalism and federal policy making. I thought it was going very well. There was lots of heads nodding until the senior bureaucrat who invited me, when giving his thanks to the room, told the room that Victorians really approved of federalism because we've managed to have so many Victorian ideas adopted by the Commonwealth government and imposed on the rest of the country. I was not sure how to tell him that he'd completely missed the point. Yet the expected corollary of growing federal government, that is, shrinking state government, has not occurred. At both state and federal levels, governments are on a long-term trajectory of increased interventionism. They are passing more regulations, more legislation. Even local councils are passing more bylaws than ever before. Part of the reason for this is an unexpected consequence of the reform movement. When governments sold off some of their large monopoly enterprises, special interests demanded that the privileges they'd enjoyed earlier should be regulated into perpetuity. That is, in order to privatise, governments have regulated. You can understand the politics behind this, but it's had some really unfortunate consequences. It has dampened the benefits of that initial reform move. The difference, of course, between a public and private sector efficiency is huge. But the difference between public sector efficiency and the efficiency of an extremely heavily regulated private sector is frustratingly less. And we should not forget, and we make an important point of this in the monograph, new special interests have emerged. Much of the new regulation and legislation we're seeing today concerns social and environmental law. For example, native vegetation laws that trample on the rights of landowners are a new and growing phenomenon. We have not seen the full consequences of those sorts of laws play out quite yet. But regulations invented relatively recently have a habit of embedding themselves into the public consciousness. It takes a bold contrarianism to challenge laws that were passed even a few years ago. That boldness, in my view, is fully evident in this monograph. It has to be. Any genuine reform movement has to take on the special interests feeding on the status quo. This work builds on a long series of collaborative papers the IPA and Mannkal have prepared over the last few years, covering everything from health to education to property rights to urban development. By preparing it, we hope to replicate the success of an earlier IPA program called Project Victoria. Project Victoria was one of the most successful think tank programs in Australian history. Released in 1992, it proposed a radical revisioning of state government, a large-scale set of privatisations and liberalisations. Much of Project Victoria was adopted wholesale by the incoming Kennett government. Certainly, the challenges that face Western Australia today are very different than that faced by Victoria 2 decades ago. But Western Australia can approach reform from a position of strength, not weakness, and the rewards could be commensurably greater. Western Australia has the opportunity to be a powerhouse, independent economy, not just in the nation, but in the region. We hope that the reform ideas we're offering today will contribute towards that end. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris, for those words. We now move to the author, or the co-author of the study, John Hyde. John Hyde is well known to many in this room. He had the federal seat of Moore from 1974 to 1983 and was a pivotal member in the group known as the Dries. And I mention, like Bert Kelly kept him honest, John Hyde keeps me focused and directed on the job at hand.
Not pleasant.
He tries. So now I'd like to hand over to John Hyde.
What's that, the blower?
Yes.
Okay.
Be gentle.
I'll be gentle. Andrew, ladies and gentlemen, it's an all too common human failing to believe that good fortune will last forever, when experience should tell us that it is a passing phenomenon for states as much as for people. Think of Greece. Ask Queenslanders what the devil happened to their AAA credit rating. Ill fortune takes many guises. Market downturns, floods, droughts, wars, dozens more. None is predictable, but taken together, misfortune of some sort comes pretty close to certainty. Meet it from a position of sufficient strength, and mostly it can be shrugged off, as for instance Australia has so far shrugged off the current, not quite global, financial crisis. So much part of the jargon today that it's simply called the GFC. Australia has so far sailed through the GFC so easily, in large part because of very satisfactory terms of trade, but also because we entered it following an extended period of unusually good governments. Hawke, Keating and Hyde. Public debt was low, very low, and the productive part, that is the supply side of our economy, was by world standards efficient. How different the situation we faced in 1929. Despite the unhappy state of the world's economies, we do not suggest that WA is facing a crisis. It is not. On the contrary, we are experiencing a phase of exceptional good fortune. We should use it to ensure tomorrow. The document we launched today, of course, does not pretend to be a comprehensive view of state government activity. We don't have anything like the resources to do that. It is much more modestly an attempt to draw the incoming government's attention and the public's attention to several of the more important opportunities to govern with a long view. Such governance will require some political courage, but no more than was once exhibited by, say, the Hawke-Keating regime. It is an attempt to make it easier for the new opposition of whatever colour to sometimes forego political advantage by respecting the public interest instead of responding to the clamour of ill-formed or simply selfish interest groups who happen to be able to command a few thousand votes which they have for sale. No opposition finds such generosity to the government of the day easy. But 30 years ago, the Howard-Peacock opposition was generous to the Hawke governments. It can happen. Unusually fine leadership and unusually restrained criticism produced several very important reforms. In short, exceptionally good government, and we still enjoy those benefits. The document is an attempt to alert the ladies and gentlemen of the media to criteria by which the incoming government and opposition ought to be assessed. We would like to draw some flack from disappointed vested interests. We drew a bit this morning, I gather, that a reforming government will inevitably attract, as the H.R. Nichols Society did to a modest extent several years ago. In truth, I don't expect that much success, but we can but hope. I didn't when I wrote that. It was before Brendan Grills got stuck into it. I loved it. We recommend like the Kennett government in 1992, the Newman government in 2012, the 1993 McCarry report here, and the more recent Economic Audit Committee, the new WA government conduct an audit of government involvement in the economy. Those who aspire to lead must know what is most needed and what is in fact achievable. And they must know in as much detail as they can achieve and at least discover some of the traps before they get trapped. Social policy is a highly contradictory term, generally used to describe government's efforts to alleviate the relative disadvantages, not of society, but of individuals. In Western Australia, it provides government-assisted housing, healthcare, education, Aboriginal welfare, aged care, care for the disabled and more. Taken together, these policies swallow the lion's share of the annual budget, and they are extremely difficult to design and administer. Unnecessary and prejudiced judgment is objectionable. The doctors and Homes West officers, in the course of their employment, have the luxury of being relatively, if not completely, non-judgmental. Politicians do not have that luxury. They must decide what categories of people, citizens and non-citizens too, are most deserving of access to the limited resources of the public purse. Inevitably, within each category, they are faced with would-be bludgers and courageous battlers in great difficulty. Inevitably, they do not, indeed cannot, appreciate the myriad circumstances of the categories, let alone those of the individuals. In my own case, experience as a politician and chance acquaintance helps me to make partially informed judgments concerning the physically disabled. But concerning the mentally disabled, I've got to admit I haven't a clue. We ask that politicians articulate the value judgments that will inform their decisions, so that these may be debated and evaluated. Because Labor politicians' humane intentions are generally better accepted, we have chosen Roger Douglas and Tony Blair, both leaders who achieved much of their intention by taking public opinion with them to show that it may in fact be done. Social policy is not functioning well and is too important and too big a drain on resources to be allowed to go by default. Not much will be achieved in defiance of public opinion. Leadership is essential. Project WA goes on to list only some of the most important reforms within individual portfolio areas. For these, you must turn to the document. Andrew will outline a few important themes and recommendations. For detail, again, you turn to the document. We are well aware that most of what we proposed is not politically easy. And such are lags that the political benefit of reform will often accrue not to the reformer, but to the next government or the next but one. Reform is not, however, impossible. Bring to mind Hawke Keating, Kennett Stockdale, Longy Douglas, Thatcher, Blair, and other politicians who have led their constituencies. In WA there is, however, an important difference. Those great leaders, and they were all great leaders, all had the political advantage of, to a greater or lesser extent, the public perception of crisis. Here there is no crisis, but instead a rare and temporary opportunity. The quality of political leadership required to grasp it may be very great indeed. Thank you.
Thank you, John. As the other co-author of the report, I'd like to talk a bit more in detail about what's included in this important study. As was mentioned, in WA, we're fortunate to avoid the problems that the incoming Kennett government in Victoria quite some time ago, and more recently the Newman government in Queensland, had to grapple with. The state of the books that they inherited necessitated major cuts and radical reshaping of government. There was and is no alternative. In WA, as was mentioned, we're fortunate to be in a better position for now. Now, much is written about the impact of lower iron ore prices and the appreciation of the Australian dollar on the state budget. The fact is, if a major shock were to occur, we would not be prepared. This is borne out in the following recent history. Royalties make up 20% of state revenue. 60 million was wiped off from the state coffers for every cent the dollar rose, and 30 million was wiped off for every dollar the price of iron ore declined. Now, such vulnerabilities bring into question the level and rate of spending growth by the WA government and the continued expansion of its size and reach. And looking at the size and the role of the WA government in 2012, we believe it's time to rebalance the relationship between it and the individual. In our view, the best way to do this is by reform across a range of portfolios, lessening the role of the state in people's lives. This can be done from a variety of ways, and one obvious area is outsourcing some of the work of government. Now, while we focus at the state level, it's interesting to look at how two local government authorities, each home to close to 100,000 people, structure their workforces. One, Sandy Springs in Atlanta, in Georgia in the US, has only 7 full-time employees. In contrast, the closest of 100,000 in WA I could find was the city of Melville, over the other side of the river. it has 182 full-time equivalent staff. This just illustrates the magnitude of difference that a government faces and can do with its workforce. Now, one of the areas that we would like to acknowledge where there has been progress has been the education sector. The piloting and expansion of the independent public schools has been a very positive reform, and despite some very negative commentary, the reform has benefited those across socio-economic and geographic circumstances. This reform could be adopted for other services, and in our report, continuing with this reform, we recommend the eventual introduction of school vouchers and eventually charter schools. And looking more broadly at microeconomic reform, through our work we've noticed a diminished capability within government from microeconomic policy analysis, especially within Treasury. This is a concern. However, on the positive side, the creation of the Economic Regulatory Authority has been a great benefit to the state. It is now time for this organisation to be given powers to initiate its own inquiries and also act as a state-based microeconomic think tank, a WA Productivity Commission perhaps. Such an expanded entity could provide a basis to continue important reform in the utilities, including water and electricity, public transport and healthcare, to name but a few. And we also recommend that efforts are made to create an environment which is more conducive to bipartisan reform. This can be done more easily if the costs of distorted markets and internal subsidies are made clear. And this was done, as we have recently found out, with, as is well known, with the prior reduction of tariffs. A lot of the quiet work by academics and think tanks helped highlight the costs so the subsidies were made clear and clear decisions could be made. Such studies, perhaps produced by the ERA, would prove invaluable to those seeking reform. Understandably, adoption of our recommendations would not necessarily result in the rapid reforms and privatisations of the 1990s. A lot of the easy work has been done. Reform now would ultimately remove or show distortions, remove distortions, create real markets, and in turn reduce the tax burden on the citizens of this state. And looking more broadly at the content, we also call reform in areas which are a constant source of grief for West Australians, namely taxi regulation, liquor licensing and shopping hours. And not forgetting agriculture, which we have had some comment on royalties for region this morning. We do note that the regulation has been steadily removed in this area. However, we do note the continued existence of the Potato Marketing Board. We recommend this is abolished. The practical results of this will be evident on dinner tables, yet for historical reasons, this legislation has been kept on the books. Restarting the reform agenda will not shield WA from an international commodity shock, but it will certainly certainly put it in a better position should this occur. As John said, this is not a comprehensive document. It does not cover every area of the state government or state budget, but we hope it moves the goalposts of reform further so we can discuss reform in a broader context and it moves the political debate. I now turn to Ron to formally launch this important study.
Friends, unlike our Federal Treasurer, we will not call upon the mystic spirits of past or present rock singers to give credibility to our project. We will let the document itself stand tall and speak for itself and hopefully stimulate some very vigorous debate. It's all about the way forward for our great state of Western Australia. Our Mannkal Foundation over the past 15 years has been fortunate enough to send about 600 of our brightest students away to internships, conferences and seminars both in Australia and elsewhere. And that makes us fortunate that we're in touch with them and we have more of an idea of what they think than many other people. We know that they're concerned about whether the current generation, like us, are leaving them an asset or a liability. They ask some good questions, like, how can our Federal Treasurer say that Australia came through the global financial crisis unscathed, when Australia now has the highest level of household debt in the world? The household debt of $82,000 per person did not exist before the GFC. That's not unscathed, that's mega scathed. They also ask, how come our state government is borrowing money to establish a sovereign wealth fund? They say that doesn't make much sense. These are good questions, and there's genuine concern from the next generation. So if our Project WA handbook is to be dedicated to anyone, let it be dedicated to our next generation. The background of the handbook goes back to 2006, where our Mannkal Foundation was often asked, who in West Australia is generating and developing state policies that look beyond the short-term political election cycles? There was mounting concerns that the glacier-like process of our local government and state government's approval process. So abysmal was this process that it gave rise to the exponential increase in lobbying groups. The only way to get any sort of outcome at all was to engage the services of these lobbyists. Mannkal recognised the need for thoughtful policy development and sought an experienced and credible partner to work with us, to join us in this task, and the Institute of Public Affairs, the IPA, was more than up to this task, and we congratulate them, and it's been a pleasure working with Chris and John Roscombe. Now, taking the lead and maintaining focus on the multiple deadlines we've had with John Hyde here from Mannkal, Andrew Pickford from Mannkal, John Roscombe from IPA, and Chris Berg from IPA. Over these intervening 6 years, a series of discussion papers have been produced and publicly launched and circulated with an incredible amount of feedback from so many influential and knowledgeable people that it's too numerous for us to actually list, but we are very appreciative for their efforts. And let me mention one point in particular that may not be known to the younger people, that John Hyde, he's a very modest guy, in his modest style is no stranger to policy formation. In his past lives, he generated several similar policy manuals for both federal and state governments. And during his term, as Andrew alluded to, as Liberal federal member with a small group including Bert Kelly, Jim Carlton and Peter Shack, who is with us today, known as the Dryers, were successful in generating policies that were, strangely enough, implemented by the Hawke and Keating government. The whole history of how these policies were adopted by the opposite party is in John's fantastic book called Dry, in Defence of Economic Freedom. That resulted in the remarkable acceleration of Australia's economic progress during those years, and I can remember firsthand of how it assisted everyone at every level. And I was the beneficiary of running a business during those years when the chains were cast off. Fantastic, fantastic opportunity, and I took it. So with that example in mind, we don't mind who picks up these ideas and runs with them, as long as somebody does. Now, the outcome, of course, of the 6-year project is summarised in this slim volume. Now, because it's slim and the earlier volumes that John was involved with were thicker, it's not that there's less in it, it's that we're using technologies, a lot of internet links. There was no internet available for John in his previous lives for the state and federal documents that he put together. Now, your input and thoughtful comment is welcome. and necessary, and we've made it very easy for you to do this. You simply go to our website, mannkal.org, click on the button that says Project WA and insert your comments. You can refer to a page number or the subject and the details so we can get back to you, but it's that simple to give us your input. In this way, we will maintain the momentum of our focus on constructive ideas for the future. Thank you. The document is formally launched.